All right, let's get started. Good to see you all tonight. Uh, the first 90-degree day probably got you dragging as much as I am. We're grateful to God for the privilege of studying together. So let's begin with a brief prayer. God, how grateful we are to you for this day, for all of the blessings that you have bestowed upon us. We thank you, oh God, for each and every person who's made their way out today to study your person. We thank you for those who may be joining us online. We ask, oh God, that our discussions tonight will be fruitful. You would open our minds to a better understanding of your word. Equip us that we might be stronger in faith. We might know how to apply your word in every situation of our lives. Bless our homes, bless our families, bless our church at large, and bless our gathering tonight in the presence of your spirit. In Jesus' name, pray. Amen. All right, I'm going to share the screen. Anybody's online, they can join us. So I don't see anybody online yet. So this is week 4. The survey of Psalms is actually taking us longer to get through it than I anticipated, but that's all right. We'll meet when we can meet, and we'll finish when we get to the end. So this is our last lesson, however, in book 1. I know perhaps book 2 will move a little bit faster. Book 1 want to kind of lay the foundation for this book. So tonight we're going to look at Psalms 32 through Psalms 41. And in those Psalms, we want to look at a general idea in this collection, this last collection in book 1, of God's salvation. These Psalms are all connected around the idea of what God does to rescue the righteous from sin and to rescue them from the wicked. Kind of an interesting piece. He's rescuing us from our sin, but there are quite a few Psalms in this where it focuses on how to handle those who come against the righteous and how God rescues us. I think there's some practical stuff in here for us to learn about how to deal with enemies, right? And evildoers. And so as we start tonight, Psalms 32 is a song of forgiveness. Right? It begins that very first verse. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven and whose sin is covered. Right? It starts with this whole idea of when God forgives, it is a signal blessing for each and every one of us. It's kind of an interesting thing because I don't know if we always look at the difference between God's forgiveness of sin and God's covering of sin. And I don't know, perhaps you might want to discuss whether there is a difference the two or not. Maybe that's a question I'll be asking you. Right? Do you think there's a difference between God forgiving sin? He says, blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven. So it's forgiven, and then whose sin is covered. Is there a difference? You think there's a difference between the two, or is this one of those, poetic Psalms where they say the same thing in the second half they said in the first half, it's using different language? we're thinking about. All right. Well, I asked the question. Okay. Right, right. So my question is there a difference between those two ideas, or is it the same thing? Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Now I want you to cover that answer, right? Sure. Come on, Kurt, help us out. Right. It's it's one of those poetic things where he says the same thing. Uh, I actually think, you know, that's probably true. That basically the same thing. Although I think that sometimes, you know, in the visual language of our ancestors, you kind of get a feeling, you know, it says your sin is forgiven. Remember the old deacons used to pray, you know, God blot out all my transgressions, right? Cast them in the sea of forgetfulness, you know, for they won't rise up against me in the bar of judgment, right? To condemn me. And my late friend Bill Hudson said, then God put a no fishing center out there, so they don't come back and bring me back, right? So that's kind of in that language, visualize the idea of covering in that sense. But yeah, I think he's hitting us with, you know, we talked about those different kinds of poetic expressions in songs. So he says it, but maybe one is a little bit more intensified, at least towards a human experience, right? Gives us some pictures. Forgiveness, kind of open and easy. You know, covering, you got to think about that. You got to picture, what does it mean, you know, to really have your sins covered, right? We talk about Jesus washing away our sins. In the Old Testament, it is he covers our sin, right? Of course, he covers them until ultimately the Messiah comes, pays the price of sin, at which point now they are. But yeah, I think it's a poetic thing. I just want to see if y'all are paying attention to the last few weeks lessons that we did. Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation, called this psalm one of the Pauline Psalms. And he called it the Pauline Psalm because he said it really reminded him of Paul's theology of forgiveness. You read Romans chapter 4, verses 6 through 8, you hear a lot of the same things. Paul, who was an expert, by the way, the Old Testament, you hear Paul using what the psalmist has said as he talks about forgiveness. Remember, Romans is the ABCs of Christianity. He gives us Christian doctrine. He explains it. And so in Romans chapter 4, verse 6, he says, even as David, by the way, he's telling us he's going back to the Psalms, even as David also described the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works, saying, blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin. So Paul takes what David says and he adds this idea, this concept of imputing. So forgiving of sin is one thing. Paul gives us a much fuller understanding. He said, God forgives our sin. He imputes within us righteousness. He replaces our sin with his righteousness. And it has absolutely nothing to do with our works. Now, this was Sunday morning. I said, you just missed your shot, right? Because he gave us his righteousness and he doesn't count, sin the way we count sin. We like to look at everybody else and say, okay, all right, I see what you do. 1, 2, 3, 4. I ain't as bad as you because I only got 3, you got 4. All right. And we set up that kind of hierarchy of sin. God covers it. But when he covers it, he imputes into the righteous or into us, into believers, his righteousness. He puts that in us. And so, he literally places his righteousness in us. And verse 11 of Psalm 32 says, be glad in the Lord and rejoice ye righteous, and shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart. When God forgives sin, when God covers, I'll take Carolyn's idea. He doesn't let everybody else know your business. All right. When he covers all of our iniquity, and then underneath that, and on top of that, he imputes into us his righteousness. We got a reason to shout, right? We have a reason to give him praise because we have not gotten what we deserve. And he didn't expose us to everybody else, like most church folks. If you hold any kind of position in church and mess up, they're gonna tell everybody. You're gonna be on Facebook, right? They're gonna be posting, child, did you hear? Did you see? And it's hard to get past that, right? And so God covers it and he imputes righteousness unto us, right? Anybody else? Any one idea or thought on that? Okay, Psalm 34. Psalms 34 is another one of those acrostic psalms, right? I remember what we said an acrostic psalm was. Yeah, right. So it takes the whole Hebrew alphabet. Every verse or every thought starts with a different Hebrew alphabet, right? And it's one of those. Psalms 34 is, that's a call to worship song, right? We hear that. We may hear that twice a month almost. From if it ain't me, from one of my other preachers, right? In the call of worship, right? I'll bless the Lord at all times. His praises shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together, right? The early church fathers suggested that this song was designed to be sung. What I should say was designed. They said it should be used in the early church, you should sing this song at communion, because it ought to be a reminder of how good God is by giving us the sacrifice in Jesus, his shed blood, his broken body, that we're getting ready to eat and drink together. And so he says, as we get ready to eat and drink, we ought to be saying, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Now, I know that's a little bit different from modern sensibilities, right? We may feel that's a little bit too cannibalistic, but for the early church, they thought that this psalm was perfect to be sung as a communion hymn, right? And the Apostle Peter uses, again, these verses in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 3, and in chapter 3, verse 12. He uses both of these, or in both of those, he uses these verses. 1 Peter 2 and 3 says, if so be ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious. All right. I'll back up a verse. As newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. If so be ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious, right? Oh, taste and see. So when you get his word, what Peter says, get his word in you, then you can taste and see that the Lord is good. Okay, right. So it's an acrostic, but it's, at least for the early church, it's a communion psalm. Psalm 35. Psalm 35 is a prayer of the faithful, right? Literally, David tells the faithful how they should pray when they know that evil people are seeking to do them harm. Right? This is a lesson for modern Christians, because our first reaction when evil folks turn on us is to do unto them as they have done unto us, right? Right? Well, if I go back to the blaxploitation movies, I'm gonna get you something. We're gonna go back and do to them the same thing that they did to us. But Psalms 35 is a prayer to God. He says, plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. You got to have a good relationship with God, really, to say, God, you fight against them as they fight against me. Notice the psalmist really takes his own actions out of that process. Now, that's a hard lesson to learn. It's a hard habit to develop, especially for preachers and pastors. That's probably one of the hardest things for us to do, when you know that folks do not have your best interests at heart. Not only don't they have your best interests at heart, they're trying to create the worst scenario possible for you. And instead of, going west side on them, you say, God, you fight it. You fight against them who are fighting against me. It's, you really never know how powerful that is until you see it in action. And I hope you don't ever have to see it in action, but I've been, I don't know if it's fortunate, blessed, or what, to have seen it. But I remember when the pastor was, officers were trying to get rid of the pastor, and he came to the point, he said, I'm just tired of fighting you Negroes. He didn't say Negroes. And he said, I'm going to give it to the Lord. I'm going to ask him to handle you. Everybody that's fighting against me, I'm going to ask God to take care of you. And in 6 weeks, he had 6 deacons to die. And I tell you, that church straightened up real quick. They straightened up real quick. And the 7th one didn't die. He had a stroke, serious stroke. And you know what they said is worse than being dead? Being almost dead, right? And he had a serious stroke. And it took him a while to come back. But when he came back, every time the pastor's office was open, he was sitting in a chair. Like, well, what did you need today, brother pastor? What do you need? How can I help? Right? So, you know, that's a prayer that I think all of us ought to kind of, that's ought to be our ace in the hole. All right. We ought, this one we ought to keep in our back pocket, all right, for when, you know, we have done everything we can do. It's almost like God giving them up to a reprobate mind, but we're doing better than that. We're giving them up to the Almighty, the Omnipotent, and saying, God, you fight against them, like who are fighting against me. Now, I would say you can't pray this prayer unless you know you're right. Yeah, because it might backfire. Right. You got to be right when you pray this prayer, right? I mean, he says a whole bunch of stuff. Draw the spear and javelin against my pursuers, right? Get out the big guns. That's really what they said. Get out the big guns, right? So, it is okay. If you look at this song, it's okay for believers to get tired of their enemies and say, God, sick them. All right. Yeah. You handle them because I can't do nothing with it. I think a whole lot of us, Reverend Kerr, would save some black hair or some hair, period, if we learn to do this instead of trying to fight some fights on our own. Right? Any comments, questions? Okay. All right. Psalms 36. Psalms 36 deals with one of the major themes in the whole book of Psalms. And it contains one of my favorite Hebrew words. That's the word hesed. I used to sign all of my pastoral correspondence. Instead of sincerely yours, Alvin Love, I would say hesed, Alvin Love, until my wife saw it, and she said, what does that mean? And I told her what it meant. And she started putting on all of her stuff and took it away from me. So I quit using it. But Psalms 36 deals with God's steadfast love. Right? His steadfast love. That means, God's love for his covenant people, his believers, that his love is faithful. It is true. It is steadfast. Right? You can trust it. Right? And so Psalms 36 continues to remind us that you can trust in God's steadfast love. It's a great concept. It's such a popular word, a popular concept. This word is used 123 times in the book of Psalms. Anytime one word is used that much, it ought to tell us how important it is in our understanding of God, that God's love is steadfast, right? Now, when it's steadfast, it means I can have confidence in it. Like I can trust God's word. I can trust in what God says and what God is doing, right? And so when I put my trust in him, I don't have to worry about all the other stuff that goes on around me. So I put my confidence in God's steadfast love. So again, this whole section is about salvation of God. And a lot of times we pull our hair out trying to figure out how we're going to fix it, how we're going to make it, how we're going to get out of the situation, how are we going to get our enemies off of us, where we're going to find peace in the midst of the confusion. It says you can be confident in God's steadfast love, right? And again, go back to salvation in Jesus Christ in Romans. We are confident of this very thing in his steadfast love. Right. All right. Well, another song that probably everybody knows, right? Or I should say every more than casual Christian. All right. Psalms 37, which is again another acrostic. A lot of people don't get it, but it is an acrostic. Fret not thyself because of evildoers. Right. This is one of what we call the wisdom songs, because the ideas that are shared in this song are also found in the books of Job, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon, all wisdom books of the Bible. So this psalm is considered to be a wisdom song, all right? And that opening line gives us the overarching theme of the righteous persevering through persecution. Right? I may have to come back and read this psalm after Bible class for some background for the sermon that I was working on for Sunday. I figured after I talked about Pentecost in Acts, I'll go to the next chapter and talk about how you go from Pentecost to persecution. Most of us would love to have it to go the other way around, all right? But how do we go from Pentecost and how do you behave? How do you act when you go from that high moment and the next thing you know, you're way down here? Like, God, what happened, right? So I ain't gonna preach myself today, all right? I ain't gonna talk about it too much because I might lose it. All right, but fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. And then he begins to give us the rationale, right? He says, because they will soon be cut down, right? So he tells us, listen, he lists all the stuff that will happen to the wicked. Why shouldn't I worry? Because first of all, they will soon be cut down, like the grass, right? Now, let's admit it. When we're in that situation, soon is never soon enough, right? God's idea of soon is not always our idea of soon, right? We sing that song, soon and very soon I'm going to meet the King, but we ain't in a hurry, right? Right? We're not in a hurry. We want to prolong that as long as possible. But the opposite end of that spectrum is that when there are evildoers who are coming against us, we want God to, get them right now. We want God to get us out of this situation swiftly, right? Quick, fast, and in a hurry. And his timing isn't always ours. And of course, that's the rub. That's where our faith gets tested. That's where we have to, really learn to trust in him, because I'm sure every one of us around here today has probably been in some situation where you're saying, God, how long? When are you going to come and fix this? Right? You said you would do it.
I don't know if y'all had those conversations, but I do. You said you would do it, and I've been waiting, but I'm still waiting. You know, when you gonna stop by here and see about me, right? Psalms 37 reminds us what will happen with him, and then tells us what we ought to be doing while we are waiting for God's soon. Right? It says, trust in the Lord and do good. Right? So when evildoers are coming against me, fret not, trust God, and don't return evil for evil, do good. Right? And he says, and if you do that, you'll dwell in the land, and verily, verily, thou shalt be fed. I took that last phrase, thou shalt be fed, and I thought about it. I said, you know, that's a little different from eating. You know, saying you will eat. He says you will be fed, right? Because you know, when I lived in the country, everything we ate came out of the ground. Yeah, but there's something that goes with that. If you don't work, you don't eat, right? Everybody's got their part to play. You don't work, you don't eat. You know, so I got up at 4:30 in the morning and grind corn and fed the chickens and you know, churned some buttermilk, right? Before I went to school. And then came back after school, had to spend 2 hours in the field. And then when granddaddy got finished with the mule, he gave it to me and said, you go water it and then turn him out to pasture. Then I can go in the house, right? Because that was my part. That was my job so that I could eat. But to be fed is quite a different story because it does not depend on your labor. It always depends on the labor of somebody else. And they feed you. They supply the labor. They hand it to you. They put it in your mouth sometimes. It's like feeding a baby. They get spoon fed. And so for me, that's quite a different picture. It says when you trust him in those situations, he'll not only make sure you eat, but he himself will feed you, right? He will feed you. It's, you know, that for me, it's just, when I read the Psalms, I get pictures, all right? And they help me, you know, to better understand the Psalms. I can't speak for anybody else. It's just how it helps me. So you'll be fed, you'll inherit the land, right? Again, an inheritance has absolutely nothing to do with what you did. Somebody else decided, right? They decided that you would get what they wanted you to have, right? So again, we have to learn to trust God. Look at verse 4, delight yourself in the Lord, right? Verse 5, commit your way unto the Lord, right? Verse 7, rest in the Lord. Verse 8, cease from anger, all right? All of those are things that we should do while we are waiting on God's soon. Right? Now, I just came up with that idea this evening. So you hear it in the sermon somewhere down the road, right? Right? Waiting on God soon. That's it. Right? We learn we have to commit, delight, trust, delight, commit, rest, and then cease from anger. And then let God do the fighting. And let God feed us and supply our needs according to his riches in glory. Right? Any comments, any questions? Y'all know I'm struggling with my voice. Y'all make me do all the talk. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say that it's not just sitting back, because all those words are action words. All of them are action words. Delight, trust, delight, commit, rest, and then cease from anger. Those are, those are action words. And listen, you may think cease is not an action word, but when, the evildoers are coming against you, it takes a whole lot of strength and restraint to cease from anger. I don't think I've shared this before, but when I first came to this church, we have the deacons calling ministry now, and it's all divided up by last names. But when I first instituted that in the church, divided the membership up by zip codes, right? And so I gave every one of the deacons certain zip codes with the names of all the people who live in those zip codes. I said, these are the members I need to check on every month. And our first order of business when we have deacons meeting is to hear from each one of them how those members in your zip code are doing. And I passed it all out. I had one old deacon who got his list, and he picked it up and he said, that ain't none of my job. I ain't doing none of that. I said, I never thought I'd deal with stuff like that. But and I said, okay, brother, I'm asking you, you don't want to do it, no problem. And then every month, first order of business was to hear from all the deacons. And every month, got around to him, I skipped over, I didn't call his name. Yeah, you're not gonna do it, And in between, every Tuesday night in prayer meeting, I got down on my knees and called his name out loud. God bless him. Bless his home. Bless his wife. Bless his family. Bless his going in and coming out. I mean, every Tuesday night, after about 4 months of that, got in a meeting. And as usual, I was getting ready to skip him. Everybody was giving me a report. I was getting ready to skip and go on. He said, hold on a minute, Brother Pastor. I got a report. All right. And never had a crossword with it. Never got mad. Committed him to the Lord and kept my focus on what he was calling me to do. And God changed his heart. So much so that when, I don't know if you remember when the churches, they were burning churches in the South. And we had adopted a burned church in Alabama. And we collected money for it. The same deacon said, Brother Pastor, I'll take it down. I'll go. And I'll make sure that everything gets where it's supposed to go. And we'll, I'll bring back a report of what they did. I said, look at God. And so we gave him the money, told him, go ahead, you do it, you do it. And so it's, God changes hearts. When we get involved in it, the best we can do is change the mind. All right. So a changed heart will result in the change mind. The changed mind doesn't always result in the changed heart. I've discovered that some folks will change their mind based on the last person that whispered in their ear. So, or the loudest voice in the crowd. All right, the last section, 38, 39 through
41. His last few are Psalms that really deal with our understanding of who we are in God. I think, no, I skipped one, didn't I? Skip Psalm 38. No, no, I got excited with Psalm 37. Psalms 38 is a memorial song. A memorial song. And it was associated with the memorial offering, where they would take a portion of the grain offering and bring it to the priest, and they would burn it on the altar. And so Psalm 38 was one of those psalms that was to be sung when they brought that memorial offering. Remember, we said some songs were designed, some were designed for certain days, others were designed for certain occasions. Psalms 38 was designed to remind us that the gifts that we had came from God. And so we bring them back to God. We consecrate it back to Him. Right? So when you go through Psalms 38, again, he's just reminding us that our hope and our trust is in Him, and all that we have comes from Him. And then, of course, psalmist is always asking God, don't leave me. All right. Right. Don't forsake me. So the first 8 verses of Psalms 38, there are a lot of synonyms for sin. Verse 1, chasten me in thy hot displeasure against my sin, right? Your arrows stick fast in me, and thy hand presses me sore. There is no soundness in my flesh because of thine anger. Neither is there any rest in my bones because of my sin. Verse 4, my iniquities are gone over my head. That's an interesting concept. It says, my sins have gone over my head. What do you think he means by that? Okay. Anybody else? So they're my sins, but my sins are over my head. They're beyond my ability to control. They're beyond my ability to even, intelligently handle. Right. So it really is an admission that, God, I can't fix myself. Right. Yeah, I can't fix myself. And the weight of my sin, that same verse, right, is a heavy burden, and they are too heavy for me, right? So mind you, I'm the one that piled it on, but I put on myself more than I can handle. Now, we can say that about sin, right? We take on sin, and when we take it on, it is more than we can handle, right? It is beyond our ability to deal with it. But listen to the way he said, my wounds stink and are corrupt because of my foolishness, right? It's kind of an interesting description of sin. And it is a constant reminder that God has provided. And so because God has provided, I'm grateful to Him and I bring back to him a portion of what he has given to me. Can you imagine what kind of resources the church would really have if folk ever thought about how big their sins were above their head every time they got ready to give, and what God had already done, right, to handle it? I think it would bring a sense of gratitude. That is, Amanda said, that's in so deep, a sense of gratitude that's much deeper than just simply carrying out, our biblical responsibility, right? So, God, you've been so good to me. I was in over my head. You pulled me out, right? I was sinking into miry clay. You lifted me up, right? You put me on a solid foundation. And because of that, I bring back to you a portion of what you have gifted me out of gratitude, right? Not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. And I'm one that actually believes that you give out of gratitude. If you just give simply out of obligation, you miss the benefit that comes with a gift. Right? I don't know why anybody would want to give and not reap the benefits that come with it. Right? It's like writing stuff off of your tax. Some folks give simply because they write it off of their tax. That's the benefit, right? But the benefits that God had is a whole lot more than IRS can give. Right? So I think giving out of gratitude. Right? All right, now 39 through 41. Understanding ourselves, like knowledge of self. Psalms 39 encourages us to really look at ourselves, because I'm gonna make this, I don't think anybody accurately knows themselves until they truly know God for themselves. May think you know yourself, but until we know ourselves as God knows us, and we become honest with who we are in Him, that's when we really come to know ourselves. Because we can build up this self-righteous vision of ourselves. And it's something churches do all the time. We build up. We're a First Baptist church that we are a little higher than some other ones. We recognize that we are in over our heads, all right? That we do need God to redeem us and save us. When we become honest with that, that is when we truly know more about ourselves, right? I ain't gonna ask you to testify or even raise your hand and admit it, but I do know that, or I believe that some of us in this room have had to deal with our own sins. And, we kept saying, oh Lord, I'm gonna get it together. I'm gonna straighten it out. I'll take care of it. Please forgive me. But then when we finally come to the point, we say, God, you have to handle it because I'm in over my head. When we admit who we really are in Him, then we come to know ourselves better, because now we realize that I'm not as strong as I thought I was, or as righteous as, even if I didn't think I was, as I try to portray everybody else, that I'm a sinner in need of salvation, right? So in Psalms 39, he reminds us, look at verse 6 of Psalm 39. It says, surely every man walketh in a vain show. Surely they are disquieted in vain. He heapeth up riches and knoweth not who shall gather them. Right? You know, we think more highly of ourselves than we ought to, right? And then the psalmist begs God in verse 8, deliver me from all my transgressions. Make me not the reproach of the foolish, right? So remind me really of who I am so that I don't make a fool out of myself by trying to pretend who I want everybody else to think I am. Right. Again, in Psalms 40, again, is one of those Psalms that deals with sacrifice and offering. It is a worship song. It reminds us that God, you really haven't required that. Even though in the Old Testament, he did require burnt offerings, right? It says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry, right? Verse 4, blessed is the man that maketh the Lord his trust and respecteth not the proud, nor such as turn aside to lies. Verse 6, sacrifice and offering thou didst not desire. Mine ears hast thou opened. Burnt offering and sin offering hast thou not required. Right? Now, we know he did require burnt offering, right? And sin offering. But this gets to the idea, again, of the heart and of us committing ourselves to him. And so you don't do this stuff out of obligation, but you bring it out of gratitude because you know what he has done. Verse 8 of that same psalm, I delight to do thy will, oh my God. Thy law is written within my heart. So you want it on the inside, and not as an outside show. Go back to the point mill of old deacons to an unfriendly girl, right? Not an outside show to an unfriendly girl. Right. All right. All right. So again, Psalms 39, 40, 41, that was 40. Really talk about, the fact that as human beings, we are fallen creatures. We're not what we ought to be, but God has delivered us in spite of us. And in the process, helps us to know ourselves better. So 39 through 41. If you have, I think it's a good collection. Want to know more about how to know who you are. Those Psalms. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So deliverance is kind of a theme that runs through all of those, right? Because in the face of my own shortcomings, in the face of my projecting myself to be more than I really am, all right, God delivers me from all. He delivers. So the idea is not only does God deliver me from my enemies, God delivers me from myself. All right. He delivers me from sin. He delivers me from my enemies, but he delivers me from myself. This was Sunday morning. I'd ask, is there anybody in here, all right, who is glad that God delivered you from yourself, right? Yes. Sometimes yourself is more dangerous than your enemies, right? And so those 4 chapters, 3 chapters remind us that God's deliverance is not just from sin. It's not just from enemies, but he delivered me from myself. I discovered that, myself, me, I am my own worst enemy. Right? And when the Lord delivers me from me, I can probably have an overflow coming. All right, any questions? Comments? Criticisms? Complaints? Right. Mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll confess, because I was born on the west side of Chicago and stayed there until I was in first grade. But by the time I was in first grade, I could cuss like a sailor. And I had an extensive vocabulary of full language, as a young child, you know. And I don't know, because my mom and daddy didn't cuss, but I learned. I learned quickly. But when I realized that was getting me in more trouble, I was in over my head. Right. And I prayed and asked the Lord to get rid of it, because I couldn't stop it. I don't even remember when it happened. I just remember one day looking up and saying, you know what? You ain't said the cuss word in a long time, all right? Your whole language has changed. And of course, then I started using big words. So yeah. So next time you hear me use a big word in the sermon, realize that that's just a reaction to keep me from cussing, right? That's right. He imputes it. And he's made me better. So, but that's the thing. You don't know who you are. We are our own worst enemies. And so the psalmist reminds us that God delivers us, not just from sin, not just from our enemies, but he delivers us from ourselves. I, for one, am grateful that he delivered me from me. Yeah, I'm a whole lot better person in his hands than I was in my hands. So, stay there. Okay. All right. That's all I got today. So thank God for each one of you today for being a part of it.